Good morning, everyone, or is it afternoon now? Good afternoon.
Hello.
Or even, yeah, afternoon. Well, thank you for allowing me to come before you today as we talk today about emergency preparedness. This is something that is very near and dear to my heart. When I was first approached about emergency preparedness, I didn't know anything about it. I wasn't prepared. If an earthquake struck or any type of natural disaster, I just would have been stuck. Didn't know anything about having basic things like water, cash on me, or just anything that I would need to take care of myself for the next day or so. But thank goodness, because of some of the people here who've reached out to me over the years through the C.E.R.T training, through emergency preparedness, I can honestly say today I'm in a much better position, prepared. So if an earthquake or a natural disaster happened right now, I'm ready for it. So that's one of the things that I want to talk to all of you about today here. Back in 1971, when we had a very big earthquake here, my great-grandmother, who was not from California, was not expecting an earthquake, and she didn't know what to do or react, and she panicked. And she was by herself, and she was so afraid that she ran through her house, just frantically running around, didn't know what to do, and she fell and she broke her leg. And in the process of being transported to the hospital, she died of shock. And it was all because of the fact that, you know, she didn't know what to expect, she didn't know what to do. She was afraid, she thought she would be alone, she didn't have any supplies. And moving forward now, many years later, 46 years later now, we know what we need to do. We know that we need to stay calm, we need to prepare ourselves. We know that you can survive an earthquake if you do some basic essential things. So that's why when you come to these emergency preparedness fairs like this, you can learn things like if an earthquake happens, you know, you should have a flashlight near your bed. It's a good idea to have some type of hard hat or have tennis shoes near your bed. These are all things that I have right next to my nightstand. So in the middle of the night or 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, if an earthquake happened, there's a bag I can grab that has a hard hat, tennis shoes, a pair of gloves, and a flashlight. Those are the main things that I would need just to get out the house. Moving on further, going to more earthquake preparedness fairs, I learned things about how to sterilize your water, because if our water is contaminated, what would you do? I also learned basic ways to make a makeshift candle by having Vaseline and cotton together and being able to light that to have some light in case my batteries die with a flashlight here. So when you come to fairs like this, even if you don't buy everything, even if you don't do everything that the manuals say, at least we want to put it on your mind as far as start thinking before you leave here today, what can you do, basic things. Sometimes the emergency preparedness equipment or supplies might be a little expensive, but as you start reading through things and realizing what you need, you can buy a lot of your products from the Dollar Tree, from the 99-cent store, and a lot of times they're things that you can have at home. For instance, when they say you should have clothes, I was able to pull out a pair of old sweats and say, okay, you know what, depending on what the weather's like, you know, if we have an emergency disaster during, you know, the winter months, I at least have sweats here. I at least have a pair of socks because I'm always cold. So little things like that. The 99-cent store had a lot of great supplies for me to be able to pick up and purchase. And then most recently, about a year or so ago, I had the opportunity to take a C.E.R.T class that was offered here in Gardena. Now these classes are free to attend, and it was a 3-day, 8-hour class if I'm not correct. And it was probably one of the best life-changing classes I could have ever attended. There were so many things that I thought I knew, but I didn't know. Basic information as far as how to help my neighbor out, how to kind of assess my street. And one of the things that I realized that I was kind of experiencing a little bit of a deficit was I was able to take care of myself, but what about my neighbors? For instance, on my street, I have 3 elderly people who live by themselves. There's about 4 families that have small kids. A couple of them are kids who are alone at home by themselves. And everybody else are, you know, they're working adults. So after taking the C.E.R.T class, it made me think about my neighbors. So I started assessing it, and I started thinking, okay, well, in the event of an emergency, who would be at home by themselves? Who would be afraid? Well, those couple of seniors that I just mentioned, they would be alone. So one of my first things to do was to organize my street and to start the conversation talking to my neighbors. What would we do with Miss Jones, you know, and Miss McKinley in the event of an earthquake because she's always at home. But one thing is to go to her house and bring her to where the other neighbors are at so that she wouldn't be alone. I would hate to see her in a situation like my grandmother was in. There are a couple of kids who are at home after school by themselves. I went over and I talked to their parents and said, in the event of an earthquake, would it be okay if your kids, if we all met at one spot? We were able to put one house as like our destination house to where we would all meet. We also talked about being able to turn off the gas. So a couple of my neighbors have not done this yet, but the rest of us have gotten together to learn how to properly turn off our gas. And for those neighbors, if you're not at home, we got the okay to be able to go over into their property and to turn their gas off for them in the event of an emergency. And so for me, the big thing was about making sure that in the event we had an emergency on our street, we would all be able to be together and to be able to comfort each other, because it's going to be a scary time. Potentially the power could be out, you might not have any water, you may have structures that are, where you're unable to go into just because if it's an earthquake. So to be able to keep everybody together, to keep them calm, is probably the number one thing. And then afterwards you start thinking about your supplies. You know, if you have your water, if you have cash, if you have whatever the necessary wrenches, equipment to turn off the things like I mentioned, like the gas, and if you have any busted pipes, if you can possibly turn the water off as well too. So those are the things that when I initially took the C.E.R.T class, it started making me think about that. And moving forward, probably about every 2 months, I add something to my emergency kit. And during the C.E.R.T class, one of the things that came to mind, I believe we were talking about Katrina, and talking about Katrina, I remember hearing this one story where there was a lady who was in the hospital and she had just given birth to her baby, and they had to evacuate everybody. And somebody took a picture of the baby, the mom went one direction in the maternity ward, and the babies all went somewhere else. And I remember thinking about that, thinking, wow, you know, what happens if you get separated from your child? And one of the things I remember learning about in our C.E.R.T class was they had mentioned that with kids, you can write their name and their telephone number on it and pin a note to them. Maybe, for instance, we're in an event here today, maybe your child isn't with you, but your neighbor's child is here with you. If we had some type of natural disaster, at least if you know what that child's name is, who that child's contact person is, their mother, you can pin it on them. You could even take a Sharpie and write it on their arm, because in an emergency, the fire department may take some people one direction, FEMA might take them the other direction, and we want to at least be able to identify who, you know, the younger kids are, especially if they don't know their mom's name, if they don't know their address. So all of this started making me think about that. So for me, in taking the C.E.R.T class here, it really brought it home for me, thinking how much better I could be prepared. One of the other things we learned about in C.E.R.T as well too was how to organize your neighbors. So for instance, in the class that I took, we had a lot of seniors there, and for some of the seniors, they felt like, well, there's not much I can do. Well, the great thing about our trainers was that they said some of our seniors, they may not be able to help with the search and rescue part, but they could be the person that could just sit there and hold that person's hand who's in shock, just to keep them calm. They can also be there to kind of talk to the children who are very afraid. So, you know, even though we think, well, in an emergency situation, maybe there's something I can do, there is something you can do. If you're one of the younger ones who are a little more physically fit, you could be part of the search and rescue team that can help go into the houses to see if anybody needs help. If you're somebody who has any type of medical training, I don't care whether it's an EMT type of training, doctor training, or just basic CPR training, that could be something that could make a difference in helping save someone's life in the event that they're injured. Somebody who has construction skills, or if you have a lot of equipment in your house. Like in my house, for instance, my brother's a contractor, so I have every piece of equipment that Home Depot has. So in an emergency, I may not know how to handle the equipment, but my brother who lives with me, he's got every chainsaw, every hammer. He is that person who has that construction background that he can help us get into a home in case we need to pull somebody out. Also, while we were taking our C.E.R.T class, I started thinking about all of my neighbors, what their occupations were. And like I mentioned, somebody may have the construction background. I have one neighbor, actually I have two neighbors. One is a nurse and the other is an EMT. So these are all the kind of things that you need to start assessing as far as how you can take care of yourself and your immediate neighbors as well too. Because one of the things that we learned was we could be without any help for anywhere from, I think it was 4 to 7 days, something like that. And we need to be able to help ourselves during that time. So taking the C.E.R.T class, attending these emergency preparedness fairs, These are all things that we can do to help ourselves, because in the event of a natural disaster like what we've seen with Houston and some of the other, Florida and other states, our personnel here, our EMTs, our firemen, our police officers, they're going to be so overburdened. So it's going to be about us being able to help ourselves here. So I hope that all of you take advantage of the material that's being given out here. Most of this material is free. Our C.E.R.T class is free, and it's a really fun class to attend. The 3 days we spent, 8 hours a day, it was exciting the entire time there. I learned so much information, and it didn't just stop there for me. I was able to go back home, talk to my brother about it, because he didn't attend the class. I talked to my parents about it. I talked to neighbors and friends to encourage them to not only take the class, but even if they don't take the class, at least I wanted to be able to share the information with them. So it's a great resource to take. We offer this class several times here in the city of Gardena. So please, there's Cindy who's here, and Jose and a few others here. So please consider taking this class. It can make the difference of you being able to survive a natural disaster. And it doesn't just have to be an earthquake. It could be a terrorist incident. It could be, I doubt we have floods in California here, but it could be anything that can happen, a tsunami. But we just want to make sure that we are prepared as best we can. And nothing about the class is hard. Basic first aid information, basic things to take care of yourself. And it's a really good class. I took the class once. I'm actually going to take it again, because there's even more information that I can learn about emergency preparedness. So there's lots of booklets here. I know the county offers information as well too. And I want to encourage everybody to also go on the internet and do a little research on this as well too, because there's so much out there that you can learn about taking care of yourself. And it's just very, very basic things here. As I mentioned about the candle and the that I was able to make by using Vaseline and cotton ball. I learned that just talking to somebody at one of the fairs here. And I thought, wow, how neat is that? Just Vaseline and a cotton ball. And you can put it inside of a can and it will burn for a while to give you some light. So again, take advantage of all of that here. And we have a lot of people here that you can ask questions to, and go from there. So again, thank you for just listening to my experiences with emergency preparedness, and hopefully you guys will find value in this as well too. Again, thank you for your time.